Mrs. Delgado, the voice on the phone said, I'm calling because your mother's attorney flagged some unusual activity. Did you know your brother submitted paperwork last week, attempting to have himself named as her sole power of attorney? I stood in my kitchen, a dish towel still in my hand, water running in the sink behind me, and felt the floor tilt slightly under my feet. I'm sorry, what? Bradley Chen submitted a request to Ms. Alvarez's office last Tuesday, along with a private physician's letter, attempting to establish new power of attorney documents naming himself as agent. He indicated your mother's current arrangement naming you was... The attorney's assistant paused, choosing her words carefully, no longer appropriate, given concerns about your mother's welfare under your care. Concerns about her welfare? Under my care. I had spent 2 years managing my mother's early-stage Parkinson's disease, her medication timing calibrated to the minute, because getting it wrong meant hours of tremors and rigidity that left her unable to feed herself. I had spent 2 years doing this essentially alone, while my brother visited 4 times, total, and called maybe once a month with the same rehearsed concern that never once translated into actual presence. And now, without telling me, without a single conversation, he had gone behind my back to try to strip away the one legal protection standing between our mother's wishes and whatever plans he had for her assets. He didn't mention any of this to you directly? The assistant asked. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't mention a word. What Bradley didn't know, what he had no idea existed, was that our mother's attorney, Diane Alvarez, had been quietly documenting exactly this kind of possibility for over a year, ever since Mom herself had raised concerns about what her son might try to do once real money entered the conversation. Backstory/setup. My name is Carmen Delgado. I'm 42 years old, and I work as a special education teacher in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been married to my husband Diego for 15 years, and we have 3 children, Mateo, 14, Isabella, 11, and Lucas, 7, whose lives, over the past 2 years, absorbed far more disruption from my mother's illness than any of us anticipated when this all began. My mother, Rosa Chen, she took my father's surname when they married and kept it after his passing, was 71 when she was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in early 2023. My father, Arturo, had passed away in 2019 from pancreatic cancer, and after that, Mom lived alone in the house I grew up in, about 15 minutes from mine, managing well enough on her own until the tremors started, subtle at first, then increasingly difficult to ignore. I have one sibling, my brother Bradley, 45, who works as a financial advisor and lives about an hour away in Santa Fe with his wife Michelle and their 2 teenage kids. Bradley has always been, in his own words, the practical one, a phrase he used often, usually right before declining to do something practical himself. Mom's neurologist, Dr. Priya Chandrasekaran, confirmed the Parkinson's diagnosis in March 2023, after months of Mom describing symptoms she'd initially dismissed as ordinary aging, a resting tremor in her right hand, increasing stiffness, a subtle shuffle to her walk that she'd tried to hide from both of us for longer than either of us realized. Dr. Chandrasekaran started her on carbidopa-levodopa, explaining that the medication timing would need to be precise, since Parkinson's symptoms fluctuate dramatically depending on how well the medication is working at any given moment, a phenomenon called on-off fluctuation that becomes more pronounced as the disease progresses. There was no family meeting where Bradley and I divided up responsibilities. I want to be clear about that, because it matters enormously for everything that came after. What happened instead was gradual, and, in hindsight, almost invisible in real time. I was the one who took Mom to that first neurology appointment, since Bradley had a client meeting he really couldn't move. I was the one who researched Parkinson's medication management, who learned that levodopa needs to be taken on a strict schedule, often 30 minutes before meals, because protein interferes with its absorption. I was the one who started organizing her pill box, weekly, then eventually daily, as her medication regimen grew more complex. By late 2023, Mom was on 5 medications total: the carbidopa-levodopa, plus a dopamine agonist, an MAO-B inhibitor, medication for the depression that often accompanies Parkinson's, and eventually something for the constipation that's a common and miserable side effect of the disease itself. Managing this wasn't simple. Timing errors could mean Mom experiencing what's called a freezing episode, where her body would essentially lock up, unable to initiate movement, terrifying for her, and dangerous if it happened somewhere unsupervised. I hired a part-time aide, a patient gentle woman named Fatima, to come 3 afternoons a week at $24 an hour, so I could maintain my teaching job while ensuring Mom had support during the hours I couldn't be there myself. I paid for the bulk of Fatima's wages out of my own pocket, roughly $1,100 a month, because Mom's modest retirement savings needed to stretch as far as possible, and Bradley's contribution to any of it, despite his professional expertise in exactly this kind of financial planning, remained consistently at 0. I remember the specific texture of how Bradley's absence developed. In the first few months after Mom's diagnosis, he called weekly, visited maybe twice a month, brought groceries once. By mid-2023, the calls had become bi-weekly, then monthly, always accompanied by some version of, "Work has been insane. Carmen, the Whitfield account is eating my whole life right now." By early 2024, an entire 2 months would pass without a single visit, replaced by texts that read, "Thinking of Mom, hope she's doing okay, tell her I love her." I dropped my teaching schedule from a full course load to a part-time contract, costing me roughly $16,000 a year in lost income, specifically so I could be present for Mom's growing list of appointments: neurology every 6 weeks, a physical therapist twice weekly to help with her balance and gait, a speech therapist once Mom's voice began to soften and slur, in ways typical of Parkinson's progression, and eventually, a psychiatrist to help manage the depression that had crept in alongside the physical symptoms. I texted Bradley updates faithfully throughout, the way I had from the very beginning, partly to keep him informed, partly, I think, still hoping he would eventually step in without my having to ask directly. Me, January 2024. Mom had a rough freezing episode today at the grocery store. Thankfully, Fatima was with her. Dr. Chandrasekaran wants to adjust her medication timing again. Bradley, that's scary. Glad Fatima was there. Let me know if anything changes. Me, April 2024. Mom's depression screening came back concerning, starting her on an antidepressant alongside everything else. It's a lot to manage. Bradley, sounds like you've got it handled as always. You're so good with this stuff. "You're so good with this stuff" became Bradley's signature deflection, repeated in various forms whenever I mentioned needing help, a compliment that functioned, in practice, as a permission slip for his continued absence. By mid-2024, my daily life had reorganized itself almost entirely around Mom's needs. I'd wake at 5:30, get my own kids ready for school, teach my reduced course load, then head to Mom's house most afternoons to relieve Fatima, manage Mom's evening medication dose, critical, since missing or delaying it could mean her symptoms worsening significantly by nightfall, help with dinner, and often stay until Diego texted asking if I was coming home at all that night. Diego, to his enormous credit, picked up the parenting slack more than any husband should reasonably have to, but even he began, gently, to ask when this was going to become sustainable. "I love your mom, Carmen," he said once. "But I feel like I've lost my wife to this illness too, and I never even get a say in how much you're giving." Rising conflict. The moment that truly exposed how alone I'd become happened in September 2024, on a Thursday afternoon. Fatima called me in a panic, telling me Mom had fallen in the bathroom and was having trouble getting up, her right side unusually rigid, even for her typical symptoms. I raced over and found Mom on the bathroom floor, conscious but frightened, unable to bear weight on her right leg. I called 911, and at the ER, Imaging revealed a hairline fracture in her hip, not requiring surgery, thankfully, but requiring weeks of restricted mobility and significantly more careful supervision than we'd previously managed, given how a hip injury complicates Parkinson's-related balance and mobility issues. I texted Bradley from the ER. Mom fell. Hairline hip fracture. We're at the hospital now. Can you come? His response came 5 hours later. Oh no, that's rough. I've got back-to-back client meetings all day. Hard to get away. Keep me posted though. He didn't come that day. He didn't come the next day either. I sat in that ER, and later in Mom's hospital room during the 2-day admission for pain management and mobility assessment, entirely alone, translating medical terminology for Mom when the confusion of hospitalization made her anxious, advocating with the orthopedic team about her Parkinson's medication schedule, which needed to be carefully coordinated with her pain management to avoid dangerous interactions. When Mom was finally discharged, needing an adjusted care plan, increased aid hours, and a temporary wheelchair for mobility during recovery, I called Bradley directly, exhausted past the point of diplomacy. I need real help, I said, not sympathy texts. I need you to take even 1 day a week, or contribute financially to what this is costing. I am completely depleted, Bradley. There was a pause, and then he said something that still sits in my chest like a stone. Carmen, look, nobody asked you to take this all on yourself. You've always been the one who steps in, who needs to be in control of everything. I've got my own family, my own stresses. I'm not going to feel guilty because you decided to make this your whole identity. I didn't decide to make it my identity, I said, my voice cracking. I did it because you weren't there, and somebody had to be. That's not fair, he said. You don't get to guilt-trip me for having boundaries, Carmen. I sat in my car outside the hospital afterward, gripping the steering wheel, feeling something inside me finally crack after over a year of holding steady. By that point, I calculated, because I'd started keeping careful records, an instinct from years of documenting student accommodations professionally, that I had spent just over $23,000 of my own money on Fatima's wages, medical co-pays, mobility equipment, and now this fracture's additional costs. Bradley's contribution over 18 months, $0, and by my count, 4 total visits. And yet, every time I mentioned needing help, the response circled back to the same accusation, that I had chosen this, therefore I had no standing to complain about what it cost me. What I didn't know yet was that Bradley's absence wasn't simply disinterest. It was, in fact, the quiet groundwork for something else entirely. Climax-Betrayal Reveal. By early 2025, Mom's Parkinson's had progressed to the point where Dr. Chandrasekaran recommended deep brain stimulation surgery be considered, a significant intervention that could substantially improve her quality of life, but came with real risks and a recovery process that would require intensive support. It was around this time, as conversations about Mom's long-term care and the costs associated with it intensified, that Bradley's interest in her situation shifted dramatically. He called me in February, and after minimal small talk, pivoted with a directness that immediately put me on edge. I've been thinking about Mom's finances, he said. With this surgery being considered, and her care costs climbing, I think we need a more structured financial plan. I have the expertise for this, Carmen. It's literally what I do professionally. Okay, I said carefully. What are you thinking? I think I should be added as a co-agent on her power of attorney at minimum, maybe even take over as primary, given my financial background. It just makes more sense for someone with my expertise to be managing significant assets and medical decisions of this scale. I felt something cold settle into my stomach. Bradley, I've been Mom's agent for over a year now. I've managed every single decision, every appointment, every dollar, without a single problem. Why would that need to change now? I'm not saying you've done a bad job, he said, in a tone that suggested he absolutely was. I'm just saying, given the financial complexity ahead, It makes sense for someone with my background to have real input, not just be kept in the loop after decisions are already made. I declined, clearly and directly, and thought that was the end of the conversation. It was not. 3 weeks later, I received that phone call from Diane Alvarez's office, the one that opened this story. Bradley had gone around me entirely, contacting Mom's estate attorney directly, submitting paperwork, attempting to establish new power of attorney documents, naming himself sole agent, accompanied by a letter from a physician I'd never heard of, someone Bradley had apparently arranged privately, suggesting that Mom's current care arrangement raised questions about the adequacy of her welfare oversight and that a reassessment of her capacity and current agent's suitability was warranted. I sat with that phone call long after it ended, reading back through my own memory of the past 2 years, searching for anything that could justify what Bradley had just attempted. I found nothing. What I found instead was a slow, sickening realization. The moment DBS surgery and its associated costs entered the conversation, along with the broader reality of Mom's assets, a modest but real estate worth roughly $340,000, including her house and retirement accounts, my brother had decided that his 1.5 years of near-total absence entitled him to override my legal authority entirely, without so much as a conversation. I called him immediately, my hands shaking. "You went around me? You tried to have yourself named sole power of attorney without even talking to me first?" "I was trying to protect Mom's interests," he said, his voice carrying none of the shame I expected. "You've been managing everything alone for a long time, Carmen. Maybe that's not sustainable. Maybe it's time someone else stepped in with a clearer head." "A clearer head?" I repeated. "You've visited 4 times in 2 years, Bradley. 4. I have every receipt, every appointment note, every hour of care documented, and you think that entitles you to just erase all of it?" "That's not what I'm trying to do," he said, though it plainly was. "I just think an outside perspective is warranted at this point." I hung up the phone and sat in silence, feeling a specific, devastating grief settle over me. Not just anger at the betrayal itself, but grief for what it revealed. That 2 years of sacrifice, of hired help, of missed sleep and reduced income, and a marriage strained thin, could be so easily dismissed the moment my brother decided he wanted a formal seat at a table he'd never once shown up to. Turn twist. I want to tell you I panicked. I did. For about a day. And then something in me went quiet and focused. Because it turned out I wasn't facing this entirely alone. Diane Alvarez had been paying far closer attention than either Bradley or I realized. Diane called me directly the same week, and what she told me changed everything. "Carmen," she said, "your mother came to see me 18 months ago, shortly after her diagnosis, specifically to discuss a concern she had. She told me, directly, that she was worried Bradley might eventually try something like this, once real money and major medical decisions entered the picture. She asked me to document her wishes very clearly, and to include specific language anticipating exactly this scenario." I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, as Diane continued. 18 months earlier, Mom had executed a durable power of attorney naming me as sole agent, with an explicit provision, drafted at Mom's own insistence, stating that any future attempt by another family member to seek appointment as agent or co-agent, absent Mom's own clearly expressed wish, should be treated as presumptively contrary to her intent, given her stated concerns at the time of drafting. Diane had also, at that same one time, arranged for Dr. Chandrasekaran to conduct and formally document a capacity assessment, confirming Mom fully understood the power of attorney she was signing and the reasons behind its specific protective language. The physician's letter Bradley had submitted, meanwhile, turned out to be worth almost nothing under scrutiny. The doctor in question had seen Mom exactly once, for a 20-minute consultation Bradley had arranged and paid for himself, without informing me, and the letter's vague concerns about welfare oversight contained no specific clinical findings, no direct examination of Mom's actual living conditions, and no comparison against her actual treating neurologist's extensive longitudinal records. I brought everything to Diane, my own 18 months of receipts, totaling over $23,000 in personal spending on Fatima's wages, medical co-pays, and mobility equipment. A detailed log of every appointment I'd attended, compared against Bradley's 4 visits and sporadic calls, and financial statements showing money flowing exclusively from my own accounts into Mom's care, never a cent moving in the opposite direction. Diane's response to Bradley's attorney was swift and unambiguous. She provided Mom's own prior documented statement of concern, dated 18 months before Bradley's attempted filing, clear evidence that Mom herself had anticipated and explicitly guarded against exactly this scenario. She provided Dr. Chandrasekaran's original capacity assessment, and she requested, formally, that Mom be independently evaluated by her own long-term treating physician to assess her current wishes. That assessment happened the following week. Dr. Chandrasekaran, who had treated Mom for 2 years and knew her disease progression intimately, confirmed Mom retained full decision-making capacity and asked her directly, on the record, how she felt about the current arrangement. Mom's answer was unequivocal. Carmen has been with me every single day for 2 years. She's the one who knows my medications, who sits with me through the hard days, who's given up so much of her own life for mine. Bradley visited 4 times and now wants control. I don't understand how that's supposed to make sense to anyone. Resolution. Bradley's petition was formally withdrawn within 2 weeks. Once his attorney reviewed Mom's prior documented statement, Dr. Chandrasekaran's capacity assessment, and the stark financial and caregiving records that left no ambiguity about who had actually been present. There was no courtroom battle, no drawn-out hearing, just an unambiguous paper trail that made the outcome inevitable the moment it was assembled. Mom underwent her DBS surgery in April 2025, a successful procedure that meaningfully reduced her tremors and improved her quality of life, and her recovery, while demanding, went smoothly under the continued care arrangement that had always, in practice, been mine to manage. A few months later, with Diane's guidance, Mom updated her estate plan, allocating a significantly larger share to me in explicit recognition, the document states, of the sustained, documented care and sacrifice provided by my daughter Carmen throughout my illness, in contrast to the absence and subsequent attempted interference of my son. Bradley didn't contest it. I think, on some level, he understood there was nothing left to contest, not with a written record spanning 2 years that spoke for itself. He called me once, months later, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I think I convinced myself the financial angle was the real concern, because it was easier than admitting I just hadn't been there, he said. I'm sorry, Carmen. I know that probably doesn't fix anything. I appreciated the honesty, even if it arrived far too late to undo the exhaustion, the fear, or the specific injury of being told I might lose legal authority over my own mother's care after 2 years of carrying it entirely alone. When I think about everything now, the $23,000 spent from my own pocket, the reduced teaching hours, the missed family dinners, the terror of that phone call telling me my brother had tried to erase my role without so much as a conversation, I don't think about it in terms of victory. I think about how close we came to losing something irreplaceable, not just legal standing, but the simple, quiet trust between a mother and the child who actually showed up for her. If you're the one managing the medications, sitting through the appointments, keeping the receipts nobody else asks to see, protect that role, formally, legally, in writing, as early as you can, not because you expect betrayal, but because sometimes the people who show up least are the ones most prepared to claim the most, the moment there's something worth claiming. My mother protected me before I even knew I needed protecting. Not every caregiver will have that safety net, but every caregiver deserves one.